Hi, this is Ann Searink at Foster Swift. I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar on library millages. Many people are already here, but there may be those that are just joining, so hopefully we can get some of the introductory issues out of the way at this point. One thing that we're going to do throughout the process is there's a panel that should appear on your screen where you can ask questions. And please feel free to do so. Typically during my seminar presentations, I take questions from the audience as we go. It's a little bit trickier with the webinar. I may not see it right away, or I may not be able to break it at this point. So what I'd ask you to do is certainly pose the question as it comes to you, and what I'll do is I will hopefully answer them as they come in, and if not, we can certainly take some time at the end of the session to answer any questions that you may have. Also, my email address is on the first screen. If you prefer to ask me a question, privately, please feel free to email me, and I'd be happy to take a look at your question. One thing that we ask not to do is to use the chat session. That's not the best way to get questions answered through the webinar. So again, please use the questions panel. Again, my name is Ann Searink. I work at Foster Swift, and I have been practicing law for the last 15 years. Throughout that entire time, I've been doing municipal law, but I've really focused the last 10 years on representing libraries. Our firm represents a number of libraries throughout the state, district libraries, city libraries, township libraries, working with county libraries as well. So we certainly have dealt with a fair share of millages generally, and certainly library millages. So some of this is going to be a discussion of the law and what specifically the statutes and the case law requires. I'm also going to get into a little bit of questions and concerns maybe that you may have that are typical questions that libraries have when dealing with millages, and hopefully we can answer some of those. Also, I want to draw your attention to some of the pitfalls or some of the problems that we've seen arise when dealing with the millage, the ballot language, and certainly during the election process. I want to get started by talking about the basic authority that a library has to levy a millage. And like anything else that a public body does, certainly a library, what we do is, one thing you should ask yourself is, what authority does the library have to do this? Unlike other areas of law where maybe if the law doesn't preclude it, you can do it, with municipal law and public entities, it's typically the other way around. You have to have statutory or some other authority to act. Otherwise, it may be deemed outside the authority of that library. So one thing we want to talk about is your basic authority. All right. I want to open up by talking about district libraries, and I certainly will get to the other types of libraries, but district libraries have the authority to levy a millage. In Section 13 of the District Library Establishment Act, it states that all or part of the money necessary for the establishment and operation of a district library may be supplied by a tax levied by the district library on the taxable value of property in the district. This is a district-wide tax, and one of the issues district libraries often ask is, if you are asking for a millage and you have, let's say, 4 townships in your district, if it doesn't pass in one township, does that cause the millage as a whole to fail? And the answer is that you look at the district as a whole. So if it passes district-wide, if all 4 townships, adding them up, the yeses outweigh the noes, then the library millage has passed, and it does not matter if one particular township had more noes than yeses. It's the district as a whole. District libraries actually have a very unique authority for millages. The district library may levy a not to exceed 4 mills, which is a fair amount, especially compared. It's twice that's allowed by township and city libraries currently right now under PA 164. 2 of those mills may be in perpetuity, and anything above those 2 mills must be levied for not more than 20 years. A perpetual millage is something that is unique. Most townships, cities, and other municipalities in the state of Michigan are limited typically by 20 years. So to have the ability to levy a perpetual millage in 2011 still is extremely rare, and it's something that's very beneficial to libraries. When I first started doing library millages, I was asked to prepare quite a few perpetual millages. I think because of the economy, a lot of libraries are leery about doing that, but they have been passed and they have been successful, so that is something that you still have the authority to do. If the district-wide millage is levied, the entire district must also be levying the same millage. I want you to keep this in mind because this is something that often becomes confusing when a new library joins your district. As a precondition under the District Library Establishment Act, a new library that joins the district, those voters must vote in the same millage rate that the district library is currently levying. But if the district library, I'll give you an example. If the district library voted in, was established in the year 2000, and soon after that the district voted in a 1 mill, it may be reduced, let's say at this point, to 0.9 mils, just for the sake of discussion. If a new municipality wants to join that existing district, they must also vote in the 1 mil original millage amount. But when they join, they will only be asked that new municipality will only levy 0.9 mils, which is the existing millage rate of the current district library. So we have seen issues with that in the past where district libraries are levying different millage rates because of the timing of entries of new municipalities. So keep that in mind if you're considering adding somebody to your district, that the district, every participating municipality in the district must be levying the same rate. One benefit to being a district library, among many, is that you are able, as a district library board, to establish the amount and duration of the millage. So it's the library board itself that determines when to put the ballot proposal on the ballot, for how much and for how long, and the district library itself becomes the taxing entity for that particular library millage. Section 10 and 10A of PA 164 for those city and township libraries that have been established under Section 10 and 10A, you know that this law is very old. It's from 1877, and there are many things that I think are incomplete in the Act, and we've dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So some of this is not as clearly defined as the District Library Establishment Act, but there are certain things that we do know that city or village and township libraries under Section 10A and cities under Section 10A and village and townships under Section 10 can do. One of the things that's very beneficial to libraries is that 50 voters in the township, village, or city may present to a clerk a petition asking for a tax to be levied to establish a library. 50 voters is not very many. It's a fairly easy amount to get, and that can actually be good or can be bad depending on the situation, but 99% of the time it's just a very pro-library, pro-millage way of not only establishing a library but getting a tax on the ballot to establish that library. The tax may be for an unlimited duration, otherwise, as we discussed before, it can be in perpetuity or specify the number of years. Typically, the petition will ask, for the amount of the millage and the number of years on the petition, and that's what must be incorporated into the actual ballot language. It's voted on at the next regular election after the petition, and it can't be more than 2 mils. So if you want to establish a library under Section 10 or 10A of PA 164, you're limited to 2 mils for the total amount of that millage. Once that millage is voted on, and it's technically a city, village, or township millage, so the ballot language will state, shall the township of X or city of X levy an amount not to exceed. But once that millage is approved by voters, the proceeds from that millage are deposited into a dedicated library fund, and that library fund is under the exclusive control of an elected library board. And after that initial millage, the initial millage as we stated before, is actually determined by the citizens, the 50 voters who present the petition. Typically, in reality, those are, it's initiated by folks who are affiliated with the library or affiliated with the township or city who are seeking to start this type of library. But really, in actuality, it is a voter-initiated, citizen-initiated petition. But after that initial millage and the library board is established, the library board itself determines how much and when to renew that millage within that same 2 mil limitation. So that's an advantage to becoming a Section 10 or 10A PA 164 library. You're given a little bit more control over your own destiny as a library board because you have the ability to determine when and how much that any renewal comes on the ballot. Also, you are able to determine every year within your authorized millage amount how much should be levied by the township or city. Another type of city library is a Section 1 of PA 164 city library. This provision actually has a very unique very unique authority contained in it. A city may levy up to 1 mil without a vote of the public. This is very unique. Typically now there was a constitutional amendment passed that requires any new millages to be voted millages. So a city just can't put on a ballot, that they just can't decide in a year that they want to approve a specific millage. The exception to that is any authority that existed prior to this constitutional amendment. Like I said, this statute is very old. It's from 1877, and this ability to levy the 1 mil has been around for over 100 years, and therefore it was able to continue after the constitutional amendment. We have encountered some cities that have chosen through city charter amendments to limit themselves and have specific charter limitations that may impact this. So if you are a department of a city and you're considering transferring into a Section 1 of PA 164 city library, what you may want to do is consult with an attorney or the city attorney as to whether there's any charter provisions that may impact this. As we talked before, a Section 10 or 10A township or city library may levy up to 2 mils in total. Well, Sections 1 of PA 164 city library may also levy up to 2 mils, but that second mill must be approved by voters. So the first mill can be done by resolution of city council on a yearly basis. The second mill must go to voters. So if you're finding yourself in the situation where you're levying up to 1 mil and you find that 1 mil is not enough, then you may have to go to voters to ask for that second mill. Unlike a Section 10 or 10A city library, if you are a Section 1 city library, it's not within the discretion of the library board on a yearly basis to determine how much millage will be levied. City council makes that decision. So for some city libraries, you're in a situation where, on a year-by-year basis, you may be getting, 1 mil, or you may get 0.8 mil, depending on the economics of the time. You may find that your funding is not very stable. So this is one reason I think some city libraries consider going district or consider transforming into a Section 10A city library is to get more control over the ability to control how much millage is levied on a yearly basis. County libraries also have the ability to levy a millage, and county libraries also are under a law that is also very old, almost 100 years old. And what the County Library Act states is that the amount agreed to be paid for services under a contract, and what's not here is that a county may provide library service in one of two ways. It can establish a county library or can contract for service. And regardless of which way a county decides to go on that particular service issue, they can levy annually a tax on the taxable property of the county to be collected in the same manner as other county taxes. I have one question that just popped up. The difference between Section 10 and 10A of PA 164, I want to go back a minute. There's really very little difference. The main difference is that Section 10A governs Section 10 governs village and township libraries, and Section 10A governs city libraries. So they've separated them into two different categories, and there's some slight differences, but both of them have the same basic authorities that was outlined in the slide that I just sent to you. So really it's just the difference between township and village and then a city library. We often get asked, how much should we levy? One thing to consider that we've been, over the past years, that we've considered obviously is state aid, penal fines, gifts and endowments, private donations, general fund donations, other funds, state and district library agreements, contracts, and user fees. These are kind of the typical other of revenue sources for libraries. One thing that's I also wanted to point out is that you as a local unit are better able to figure out how your property values are doing. I mean, when we used to do this, 5-7 years ago, what we used to do is we just anticipated, a growth of, the rate of inflation, 3.3% every year. In some communities, the taxable value was much higher than that. Some, was growing at a pretty steady pace, but typically it was growing. And as you know now, I'm the last person you need to hear this from, but your property values have typically been declining. And so there may be more, interaction between you and the county or your local municipality to see how much their finance department has projected that revenues will increase or decrease over the next few years. If you've got a 10 or 20-year millage or millage in perpetuity, it may be more of a short-term problem. But if you're going for 3, 4, or 5-year millage, this may be something that you have to pay special attention to. The other thing that you should consider when thinking about how much you should ask for is figure out how much is being collected and taken off the top by the DDAs, LDFAs, and other tax capture entities. Some may capture as little as $500 from you. Some, depending on the city, may capture tens of thousands of dollars from you, and that's going to obviously impact your bottom line. One of the, I guess, the changes in the economy that's, at least for the last couple years, a lot of library communities have not been rolled back. I mean, typically when we thought about how much every year and how much in the next couple years, we anticipated the increase of property value, but we also had to think about how much the Headley rollback was going to affect it. And a lot of Headley rollback factors have not come into play in the last couple years, and so that may be something also to think about when contacting any finance people that you have. Think about any rollbacks that may affect the total amount of revenue that you'll be collected. And it is in taxable value, not assessed value or SEV, so think of things in the terms of taxable value. I'm going to move on to talking about the specifics of the ballot language, but there's a question about whether you can get a copy of the slides after the presentation, and certainly we can do that. We'll make sure that those are available, and we'll send out a follow-up email to say how you can access some of this information. For those of you that have done ballot proposals before, this is probably going to be something that's not new to you, but and certainly anyone who's been to the ballot box, you can see that a lot of the ballot language is technical, and it's not very user-friendly, and it's not something that's in kind of down-to-earth English. It's very technical, and I want to explain why, because there are reasons why the ballot language is drafted the way it's drafted, and it's really that we are sort of limited by what we're required to do by statute. Michigan law has very specific requirements for ballot language. PA 284 of 1999. So this is over 10 years old now, but when it came out and it was amended 10 years ago, it really caused a lot of people to shift the way they did their ballot proposals. So I want to caution you that to have an attorney look at your ballot proposal before you issue it to voters. Certainly don't use your ballot, if you have a 20-year millage and it's up for renewal, it's likely not going to comply with the new requirements of PA 248. So that's something, certainly talk to your library attorney or city attorney or township attorney about the requirements and make sure that it complies with the statute. It's a little, I think of it like an insurance policy. It may cost you a little bit of money up front, but certainly it's better than having a ballot proposal that is challenged in the end because it doesn't meet the statutory requirements. The first requirement for the ballot language is that the millage rate to be authorized. This is expressed in mills. And a mill is 1/10 of a cent. So in millage language, this is described in terms of how many dollars or cents per $1,000 of taxable value. 1 mill is $1 per $1,000 of taxable value, and a half mill is 50 cents per $1,000 of taxable value. You want to make sure that your written numbers match, your written description matches your numbers. What I've seen a lot, and it's not necessarily mistakes, but what municipalities do, and which I think is a good thing, is they take a look at what they've done before, and sometimes if they've done a recent millage, they just transcribe the numbers and put the new numbers in the old language. If you're going to do that again, I'd make sure that it's reviewed, but make sure that if you've changed the ballot language, that you've changed all factors of it. Sometimes I think that trips some libraries up. And we often use, stated in terms of an amount not to exceed. Old ballot language, if you see it, it typically says, shall the city or district library or township levy, $1 per $1,000, 1 mill is $1,000 per taxable value. We like to say an amount not to exceed. It gives you some flexibility. If you don't want to levy the maximum each year, then there's absolutely no question that you have the authority to do that and don't have to do what the voters, the maximum limit that the voters approved. Most libraries, I'd say there are very few that don't levy the full amount that they're authorized, especially in these economic times, but just to make sure in the future that you have that authority to do so. The ballot language also has to state the estimated amount of revenue that will be collected in the first year that the millage is authorized and levied. Again, this should be expressed in the terms of taxable value, and you must consider the year that the millage will be first levied and authorized. If a lot of libraries, I see especially, are nervous about the voters at this point, and they're nervous about the election. So in response to that, I see a lot of libraries wanting to put up a ballot question earlier than, before their current ballot authorization has expired. And if you do that, we just want to make sure that you take into account the years of the year in the estimate of the revenue. So for example, let's just say that you put a ballot proposal on the ballot this November, but the first year of levy won't be until next year, 2012. What we like to do is, based on maybe go back and look at 4 or 5 of the last years of taxable value for your jurisdiction, and see you can maybe get an idea if it's been flat or if it's gone up by a 1% or a small percent. Then we'll better able to estimate what it will be in 2012. So again, it's just an estimated amount. I mean, if it's not, they're not obviously requiring you to foretell the future and know exactly how much you'll levy in the next year, but we would like to get it as close as possible and based on some specific concrete data, so that if it's ever questioned, we can say, look, we went back, we looked at this is the reasonable expectation of the amount that we think we'll receive. I think that would be especially true if, for example, the estimate was actually a lot lower than the amount actually collected. So let's just say if the ballot language says that you're going to collect $500,000 in the first year, and for some reason that was very low and you're collecting $600,000, that's where you may get some questions from voters. And so you want to be able to show that you looked at the issue and that there was some specific data that you looked at in order to back up that claim. Also, the ballot language by law is required to have the duration of the millage in years, and we recommend having not only the number 20 years or 5 years, for example, but also the dates from 2011 to 2030. This is going to, if you have a long millage, this will really help the people that will come behind you, because often what we have to do is look to see, well, what year was it levied? what year was it levied, what year was it first levied, and then we have to do the 20 years from there. And often it's kind of hard because sometimes a period of 20 years and then the actual dates so that everyone's pretty clear on that issue. I see a number of questions. I might have to answer some of these questions in the end. I don't want to skip over them, so we'll get to them. There's some of them that I think that we've already passed a little bit, and we'll get to those at the end. Let's see. So again, some libraries may only levy a millage or a portion of a millage for a maximum of 20 years. Some also may be limited by charter. So especially if you're a city attorney, ask your attorney for assistance regarding the limitations on these millages, because for cities especially, they're governed by charter, and so there may be specifics as to each city that I can't, sitting here today, tell you at this point. So again, if you're a city attorney, also look to your charter to make sure there's nothing different in there. So again, I think we've discussed most of this, but if you, the initial levy, if you're going to vote on the issue in a year that's different from the first year that you're going to levy it, you have to indicate that to the voters. So make sure that that's pretty clear and that you've thought of that. The other thing I want you to make sure of when you're doing this is especially true for district libraries and district libraries that have cities and townships in the district, because this is one of the common things that we deal with at every millage election with district libraries. Think about every single one of your entities that and when they are allowed to levy their millage. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you want to go for a vote. You're a district library and you have a city that's one of your participating municipalities and you have a townships that are participating municipalities. Townships generally, their millages are levied in the winter. Cities, most of the cities, a lot of the cities have summer levies that are required by charter. Not all. That's one of the things that if you have a city, you should make sure when they're able to levy their millages, because if you have a library millage, and we've seen this happen before, where you let's say you have it in December 2011, that's when you want your initial levy to occur, and you say, okay, we can hold an election in November, we can levy it in December. You have to levy the same amount uniformly each year. Well, if a city can't levy it also in December and has to wait until the summer, then you're going to essentially lose out on 1 year of your levy, because your ballot language is going to say you're going to levy it starting in 2011, and legally you can't levy it until 2012. So one of the things to consider is who, this doesn't happen a lot with township libraries or city libraries. It's often pretty clear when you're able to levy your millage, but keep this in mind, especially for district libraries. One thing libraries have that you should consider, and again, the timing is issue, but you should know you have to submit your L2049s every year by September 30th. But there's a specific provision in the law that says that if a millage election is held at the November general election, the law permits local youths to levy it in December of that year. But again, we want to make sure that you consult your attorney to verify that any millage approved by in a November election can be levied that December, and consult with your city to make sure it's legally permissible. One of the things that a ballot language has to include is the clear statement of the purpose of the millage. And this is going to become very, very important for you, because if you don't clearly state the purpose of the millage, or if you state a purpose of the millage and try to use it for something else, you may be in a position where you're not spending your money lawfully. Because Michigan law provides, and this is a very old line of Attorney General opinions, that funds raised from a millage may not be used for any other purpose than specifically set forth in the ballot language. So what we do typically with a district library, for example, is that we state that the purpose shall be for all district library purposes permitted by law. That way you can set yourself up with a ballot proposal that would allow you to do anything that a district library is authorized to do, which would include operational, construction, anything that you would think that a district library could do, you can use that ballot language for. For other types of libraries, you may need to be more specific. And one of the things we're going to get into a little bit later is that you have to state any other local unit of government that the money is going to go to, and I'm going to talk about how this is going to impact you with respect to DDAs. But for townships and cities, this is a little bit tricky because typically what we do is we say that it shall be, the millage shall be used to support the, specific township library or specific city library. Well, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing this, and a question that we ask our clients is, what do you think that the money will be used for in the duration of the millage? Okay, so if you have a perpetual millage, you want to make sure that it's most expansive as possible. If it's a 5 or 10-year millage, what will you be doing in the next 5 or 10 years? One thing I want to caution city and township libraries on is that think about whether it's possible that you may go to become a district library during the term of your current library millage. And if so, you want to make sure that you add some language in there that would allow you to use that money towards funding a district library. The District Library Establishment Act has a specific provision in there that says that a single participating municipality may continue to levy its millage for library purposes in support of the district library unless prohibited by the ballot language. So if you have very narrow ballot language that says it can only be used for this library, under this management, or something that makes it pretty clear that it couldn't be used towards a district, you may not be able to use that particular millage in support of a district library. And that would be, a lot of times that's how district libraries start, is they, for a limited time, they're continue to be funded by an existing either city or township ballot proposal, which they're specifically allowed to do. So typically, as a remedy for that, what we would do is we would, say that this, is we support, is in support of a particular township or city library, for example, and then we add sort of a catch-all, and all other lawful library purposes, permitted by law, something to that effect. So that it's clear that it's more expansive, that you can use your money for this particular township library. You can also use it for district library purposes in the future if that's what's going to, if that's in your plans. And if it's a 10-year or 20-year millage, you might not know exactly what's going to happen in the future. So you may want to open it up to be something that would allow that, in 15 years to convert to a district library if that should be the best option for that community at the time. I'm seeing a couple questions about Section 10 and 10A city libraries, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to address those questions at the end of the session just to make sure that I want to make sure I see there's a lot of questions. There may be some confusion about city libraries and so forth. So certainly we can answer those questions I'll take those questions at the end. But one of the things I want to talk to you a little bit about is some of the common problems that we see with this purpose provision. Some libraries specifically narrow their ballot language, and I want to talk a little bit about the difference, because there may be a reason why you want it to be specifically narrow. But here's an example of a common problem. We want to use the money to operate the new building, but our ballot language only provides the money for the construction of a new library. Can we use the money for the operation of the library? The funds for operations would likely be subject to challenge, and that's why we talk about, when we talk about doing the purpose, to make it more expansive than that. Don't just use for operation or for construction. Make sure that it includes construction, operation, purchasing for things that could be more expansive to that. Again, another common problem is, again, operational, and they're considering, if they have a 10-year millage to operate a particular branch and now they're considering closing the branch, can we use the new millage funds for other library purposes? Again, it may be subject to challenge if you've unnecessarily limited yourself to that particular particular branch. Another example of a common problem, we just asked voters for an operating millage a year ago, but the money was not going to be enough and we have to reduce the hours the library is open. Can we ask for an additional millage to increase hours of operation? Again, if you certainly can go back to voters unless you've already reached your statutory limit, okay? But if you want to ask for additional millages, sometimes libraries want to use it for a specific purpose, just for example for additional hours, and they may be you doing this for a specific political purpose because this may be something that resonates with the voters. If they knew it was going for additional hours, they'd vote for it. If they thought it was just general operational, they may not vote for it. But again, I want to stress that if you narrow the purpose of the millage in your ballot proposal, you are stuck with that narrow purpose for the use of the funds. And you may have to put your funds, this is an accounting issue, but you may have to segregate those funds and put it and make sure that it's at least, from an accounting perspective, that those can be tracked so that you use it only for a specific purpose. The ballot language must also include a clear statement indicating whether the proposed millage is a renewal of a previously authorized millage or an authorization of additional new millage. I think when I look at ballot proposals that are prepared, across the state, and believe me, I for some reason I'm drawn to them in the paper and stuff. So I actually look to see what the way ballot proposals, not just for libraries, but for roads and fire and stuff, are drafted. And this I see kind of statewide, I think, is the biggest mistake that municipalities are making. And the reason they're doing this is that the language of I think the language of the statute is very clear, but municipalities have been interpreting it differently over the years. But the Attorney General issued an opinion a couple years ago that really clarified this, I think, for a lot of municipalities, and it was consistent with the way that we had been interpreting this. So we can now at least state to our libraries that this is our opinion. It's also the opinion backed up by the Attorney General at this point. But in order to call the ballot or call the millage a renewal, it must be a true renewal of the millage as last levied. One of the mistakes that I see being made is, let's just say that you had a millage that was a 10-year millage that expires this year, and the initial mill was, and I'll use the example on the slide, was the initial authorization was for 1 mill, but because of the Headley rollback, it's reduced by 0.87. One of the biggest mistakes I see is that municipalities are asking for a renewal of 1 mill. You can only call a renewal the 0.87, the amount that was last levied. If you want to recover the full amount of the previously authorized millage, you have to ask for the 0.13 mills as new millage. So the statute, as you can see, the bold language that's italicized is right from the statute. So you have 2 options: renewal or, quote, new additional millage. So there's really only 2 ways you can characterize a millage proposal currently. So a new millage is any millage that is not a renewal. So if you go for a Headley override, that rate will be considered, that Headley override, you've probably heard that term, that's considered new millages. If you wanted to ask for, and I see libraries that do this a lot, where they maybe they have a perpetual millage of 1 mill, and they want to ask for an additional 0.5 mills because back in 1980 when that perpetual millage was voted in, it's just not enough anymore. It's been reduced too much. You can call that new additional millage a new millage, and you don't really have to tell voters that you have this old perpetual millage that's still in place. It really is a separate independent millage. Again, as long as it's within your statutory total amount that you can ask for, 4 mills for district libraries, 2 mills for PA 164 libraries. So again, it's either an additional new millage or a renewal millage. And we've actually been able to we've actually been able to craft ballot language that I think explains to the voters. We'll get to this a little bit later, but if the new millage is under 0.5 if it's under an addition, if the new millage is 0.5 mils or less, you can ask for a renewal in the new millage in one question. So typically what we say is we say to voters, you know, we want to levy let's just say, using that old example of the 0.87 mils, we want to levy 1.0 mil, of which 0.87 is a renewal of previously authorized millage, and the 0.13 is new additional millage. And of course, I'm paraphrasing this. This would be in the ballot language, but you can see how that would play out. We're telling voters that we want the 1 mil back, but that we are asking for in one question that 0.87 of that will be a renewal and the 0.13 will be new additional millage. One of the questions I just got, unfortunately I haven't moved on past the topic, is it's permissible to add the words to restore to the renewal and new request. And what we do is we work in, and I don't know to restore, but sometimes we do that as a little bit of a preliminary part of the, you know, that the purpose of this millage is to restore the amount, you know, previously authorized. But in the ballot language somewhere, you have to use the words renewal, or you have to use the words new additional. And we've worked with communities on making sure within that statutory framework that we, you know, convey as much as possible that they're actually just voting, you know, they voted 0.10 mil before, and they're going to be voting a total of 0.10 mil now, but just that we need to break it up and specifically state what part of that needs to be a renewal and what part of that needs to be designated as new millage. I'm getting probably to my least popular part of the ballot language, and this is a requirement that the ballot language shall fully disclose each local unit of government to which the revenue from that millage will be dispersed. And I want to go into this in a little bit more detail, because this is something that I think is the most problematic for libraries. It causes the most controversy, and it's what we spend a lot of our energy explaining to voters. What the law says is that you have to disclose each local unit of government, and the way the statute has defined it, as you can see on the slide, it says a local unit of government means a city, a county, city, village, township, school district, intermediate school district, community college district, public library, or local authority created under state law. Our reading is that any authority would include the Downtown Development Authority, local other entity that captures taxes. And one of the things I think that the Michigan Library Association has been working on lately is that there's a lot of entities that have, in the past years, that have been given specific authority to capture taxes. And some entities have had, you know, legislatively been able to exempt themselves, and so far libraries really haven't made that list. So libraries are subject to capture statutorily by some of these entities. Obviously there's opt-out provisions, and we're not going to get into that in full detail right now. But assuming that your library is subject to capture, your library millage is subject to capture by these entities, you have to reveal that to voters. This can become a problem. And it really becomes a problem, I see politically, for certain types of libraries. One, district libraries. And let's just say you have a district library that has a, you know, maybe a large, medium to large city with a DDA and many outlying townships. Well, I see often that the township residents don't want, quote unquote, their part of their district library millage going to the city. And really, you know, the millage is only going to be captured within the established DDA district, and so there's a lot of education that has to go on. But once people sometimes see the DDA on the ballot language, they become suspicious, they become, you know, irritated, and especially in the second group that I think is really has problems with this is where the DDA is very unpopular or the DDA is subject to criticism. And I think, again, I've been seeing this more often lately, and I don't know whether it's because there's a lot more people who are now paying attention to the way public entities are spending their tax dollars, but I think there's been a lot more vocal criticism of DDAs lately, and so their popularity may directly they see library, then they either vote yes or no to support the library, and the fact that part of it's going to be subject to capture by a DDA really won't affect them. But there's other people that may actually have questions about that, and so voter education is very important on this issue. And my advice typically is to find out how much you think is going to be captured by the DDA. If the DDA is going to capture like $1,000 out of a $500,000 total amount of revenue, I think it's important to tell voters how small that is. Also, you know, think in exchange, you know, try to work with your DDAs. Maybe there's ways that DDAs, you know, you can show voters how DDAs have benefited from you. And there's been some discussion I see on the listserv lately about that issue, that some libraries actually have a very good working relationship with the DDA, and it may actually be an asset, and they can tell voters, you know, although, you know, part of our millage is subject to capture, they've given us X amount of dollars over the year to, you know, do something in our facade, especially if the library itself is in the district. So that relationship between the library and the DDA should be considered, because it's certainly something that you have to notify voters of, and it's certainly something that could impact the way that your ballot language is perceived. We'll get into a little bit later, because I want to discuss, at the end we're going to talk about a little bit about the Michigan Campaign Finance Act and what I like to refer to as the do's and don'ts of library millage campaigns. And this is one of those issues, the voter education, that we'll get into a little bit more. But again, and not to plug a presentation that we're doing too much, but at the Michigan Library Association Annual Conference, I'm part of a panel that will be discussing this millage issue and the DDA issues and how to deal with that. And there's things that you can do as far as tax revenue sharing agreements, and if you can get those agreements into place, then certainly that's something that you can do. And I want to highlight something that was just in response to a question that was just posted to me, whether a local TIFA has held the library harmless and does not capture, do you still need to report it as a potential capture? Here's my opinion on that, and again, it's something you should consult your attorney with. It's really going to depend on what the agreement is with the TIFA and and for how long that agreement's in place. Let's just say that you've entered into a agreement with your DDA that they're not going to capture any of your library millage for the duration of your millage. That, to me, is something, if it's a contract, it's in place, it's been signed by the boards, that's something to me that's sufficient enough where you would not have to notify voters that the library money is going to be captured by the DDA, because frankly, according to the contract, it will not be ultimately dispersed to the DDA. It will be ultimately dispersed and used by the library. So a lot of local, especially if it's smaller communities, that some people have sort of handshake deals. Some people have, the TIFAs just, or the DDAs, for example, just haven't levied in years, and so the assumption is they're not going to levy. If there's a possibility, or if they would have the authority to levy in the duration, in that time of the millage, then I would say that you have to still notify voters of that. If they've agreed to only capture half of your money and not to capture the other half, again, those are the things that I would still trigger that notification requirement in the ballot language. But when you're going to talk to your voters and educate your voters, if you have a contract that says the DDA is only going to capture half of the millage for the duration of the millage, I think that's something that would be important to tell voters about, so that they understand that it's not, you know, $10,000 that's going to the DDA, that only $5,000, and maybe, you know, if there's things that you receive in direct benefit from that, those are also things, again, that you might want to talk about in your voter education. But again, going back to the ballot language, You know, you've seen that the ballot language is a paragraph on the ballot, and it gets very complicated and it's very technical as currently written, and so we don't want to complicate things more by being overly explanatory within the ballot language itself. With respect to these issues, though, I typically have some when I do the ballot language, this is one of those areas that I really try to work with the client in making sure that they, in the needs of their particular community, because sometimes we just say something very simple like, a portion of the library millage may be subject to capture by the, X city DDA. Sometimes we want to be a little bit more explanatory by saying, the portion of the district library located within this particular district may be, those taxes may be subject to capture. And there's, a number of different ways we can say it depending on what you feel the voters are going to be concerned about. If they're going to be concerned that, how much it is, sometimes we say a small amount. If we can actually say that. If it's going to be a large amount, we obviously can't say that. So those are some of the things that you're going to need to talk with your attorney about, and make sure that you're comfortable with the way that that particular notification is worded on your ballot language, because that's something that I typically work with to make sure that the local board's very comfortable with that. One issue, and I briefly touched on that, is do we need 1 or 2 questions? Well, there's a legal requirement that if the new additional millage is greater than 0.5 mil, you have to ask for that in 2 questions. And this is actually an issue that has affected how much ultimately the library will ask for, because some libraries do not want to go back to voters with 2 questions on a particular library ballot. So they'll end up asking for less than they really want so that they can get it under that 0.5 mil threshold. So keep that in mind. An example would be if your library previously had 1.5 mils for 20 years and it got rolled back to 0.97, do we ask for the restoration of the 1.5 mils? Do we need 1 or 2 questions? You must have 2 questions, because you're going to ask for the renewal of 0.97 mils and a new additional millage of 0.53 mils. So because that is greater than 0.5, you're going to need to ask for that millage in 2 questions. Again, I briefly touched on this before, but if the library desires to ask for voters for renewal of the previously authorized millage and ask for an amount lost due to Headley, and I gave you the example of 1 mil that's been reduced to 0.5 mils, you can ask for them to renew 0.9 mils and ask for an additional 0.1 mil. I want to stop here just to stress something I don't think I stressed before. I basically, over the last 15 years, have been based on my clients' desires, have been trying anything that we can get to be called a renewal, we call a renewal. Typically, public bodies like to go back for quote-unquote renewal, so they don't think that the overall tax rate is going to be increased by that much. Recently, though, I have seen that libraries don't want to get too overly, we send them the ballot language that says, 0.9 mils, a renewal of the previously authorized millage, and 0.10 mils, new additional millage. Some of them just think that maybe the library, for example, if the library is heavily supported and they know that any library millage will pass, it might just be easier to say, ask for the 0.1 mil. And if you ask for the 1.0 mil in that manner, even if 0.9 of it, for example, is a renewal, you can always ask for new millage of 0.10. You don't ever have to call it a renewal. It's just the reason we dwell on that so much is that typically in the past that's been the goal, is to as much as possible call millages renewals so that voters don't feel like they're constantly being asked to increase their taxes by exponentially. Okay, the library must adopt a resolution to place the ballot question on the election. And one thing I want to stress is that only 2 millage elections take place within any 1 calendar year. For district libraries, this really doesn't impact you too much because you have a handle on whether how many millages you've gone for in the year. But for cities, townships, and villages, this may actually impact you more because the cities, townships, and villages have their own ideas of what millages they want on the ballot and have an idea of when they want to place those on ballot. So it's really something that we want to make sure that you're not precluded in any one year from asking for a millage because, let's say, the township's already put something on in at the February and at the August ballot, and then there's a question of whether you'd be able to put that on again in December. That's something you need to work out with the townships and villages. Certainly, if you've had a February election, and it looks like you may have an August election, that may impact whether you try to seek to put yours on at the August election or on at the December election. Millage elections, depending on the community, can be very expensive, and so a lot of times townships will try to pool their questions into one election and not go for these special elections. So I haven't really seen that anecdotally as being too much of a problem, but it certainly can be, and it is out there. So I certainly think that you really want to take a look at that and make sure that you're working with your city, village, or township officials so that you can make sure that you're not lawfully precluded from putting your ballot language on a specific election. That timing issue might be very important to you. There's a question about a millage rate in perpetuity that's been eroded by Headley. And so the question is, if you have a millage in perpetuity of 2 mills that's been eroded by the Headley Amendment, do we ask for additional new millage of less than 0.5 mills to get back to the 2 mills since the existing rate is in perpetuity? The answer to that question is yes. If you have a millage in perpetuity and you want to recover the amount lost due to Headley, that would be classified as a new millage. And you can ask for that, and I don't know if there's, I got to read the question again, I want to make sure I'm answering it. But you have the existing millage rate that keeps on, there's actually, so every year you're basically collecting 2 millages. You're going to be collecting the millage rate that you originally voted in perpetuity, and then if it passes you'll be asking for the additional new millage. But that additional new millage can be in any particular amount because you're not asking for any. It can be over 0.5 mils because you're not asking for a renewal in connection with that. So I think that's the question, is that you can ask for, like, for example, if it's 0.75 to get you back up to the 2, you can ask for 0.75 new additional mils to get you back up to the 2 without having to do anything in 2 separate questions. If I haven't answered that question, please let me know. Ballot language must be certified by the county clerk 70 days before the election. We recommend this at a minimum for all, is the minimum for all elections. The good thing now in the last, I'm loving the Secretary of State's office because the Bureau of Elections puts out very far in advance an election calendar. And 10 years ago we had to go through and count the days and make sure all the days were right and figure out when all the stuff had to be done. That is all set out for you. Go to the state of Michigan's website, you go to the Bureau of Elections, and that certainly is something that they do now for us. I've seen some discrepancy with county clerks, and there's some confusion with the county clerks. So what I always recommend that you do is, if you're going for a ballot proposal, you go on the website, figure out generally when you think the election date is, and then always confirm that with your county clerk. The actual language must be approved by resolution of the library board. Certainly for district libraries, that's true. There's the issues for the township, city, and village libraries. That millage language is technically a city millage. It has to be approved by city council in most cases. I don't want to get into all the little ins and outs of that. So if you've got a city library millage, I would certainly contact your city attorney or other attorney to figure out the process for that. But it has to be done by resolution of a board, and that must be certified to the county clerk. For district libraries, if you have a school district in your district library, that also has to be certified to the school district election coordinator. However, often the school district election coordinator's duties have been transferred to the county clerk, just to make it, extremely confusing. So for district libraries, we usually do, I usually send it to the school district election coordinator and also have them send it to the county clerk, just so that there's no question of that. And then there's 4 election dates in February, May, August, and November. Those are statutory election dates now. It used to be, you know, a number of years ago, you could have special elections and there was a lot more confusing about the dates, but now it's really down to 4 typically, and so those dates and those timelines have been spelled out by the Secretary of State. One thing I want to draw your attention to when you're looking at those election calendars is that there's a portion on the election calendar that says petitions for the local ballot proposals are due by a certain date, and then approximately 2 weeks later you'll see that the ballot language is due. The petition is typically not the deadline that you have to do just to do a typical ballot. The petition deadline is the one for, I talked to you before about forming a Section 10 or 10A city library. I told you that, you know, citizens submit a petition to put a ballot proposal on the ballot. That's the petition that they're talking about when they're talking about the petition deadline. So again, it's important to go over those deadlines with your clerk and with your attorneys to make sure that you're not you know, overly, you know, concerned about making a deadline if that's not the actual deadline, because sometimes these things take time and sometimes these things come up last minute and you want to make sure you have appropriate time to deal with them. The timing also, I mean, that's something you're going to have to judge whether, you know, on any particular, you know, situation. A lot of times if they feel like, especially with certain types of libraries, that they may get problems with the county or the city and for putting the library proposal on the ballot, it might be beneficial for you to you know, get this done way in advance. If it's a district library and your board's in full control, you know, and you can wait till closer to the deadline, that's something to consider. But that deadline is very hard and fast, and if you don't make the deadline, it does not go on the ballot. So that's one thing that always keep in mind when you're doing a library millage. All right, I want to talk to you a little bit about marketing the millage. This is one thing that I want to say right up front, because I've gotten a lot of questions about this. One thing I want to talk about is the difference between the election itself and preparing the ballot language and the campaigning on behalf of the millage. Okay, district libraries, city libraries, township libraries have the authority to, 1, pay for the cost of the election, and 2, pay for the preparation of the ballot proposal and resolution. I've realized this has been an issue of confusion when I've had, I've had clients want to hire our firm to do the ballot proposal, and then they are concerned about, you know, how they're going to get the funding for it. Well, municipalities have the authority to pay for that part of the ballot proposal, and to pay for the actual cost of the election. What you may not use your public funds for are to campaign basically on the vote yes on the millage campaign. And I know that there's a lot of libraries, and I know like a number of years ago there were seminars on this, and some libraries do things a little bit differently than others, but we recommend a pretty conservative approach on this. The other thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't have to be as blatant as vote yes on the millage. The promotion of millage can be deemed to be something a lot more subtle. For example, if your millage says that if the material submitted by the library says, if you don't approve this millage, you know, we're going to have to cut all our programs, and you probably have to cut hours, and we're going to have to, you know, fire our staff and so forth. While that may actually be true, that is probably going to be deemed more promotional than factual. Because simply that those decisions have not yet been made by the library. They may or may not happen because they haven't, you know, you're waiting to see whether the millage will pass in order to make those decisions, those tough decisions on what you do as far as your funding goes. So those types of comments are very problematic from my perspective as far as violation of the Michigan campaign finance laws. One of the questions we get a lot is what material can be in the library. We recommend that you not post anything in the library that you don't have your authority to spend your public money on. Well, and what are the types of things that you can do as far as the campaign for your public body? Anything that is really backed up by statistics is something that could be, because you're looking for objective versus subjective. So if you tell voters that we need more money because, for example, you know, over the past 5 years, circulation has increased by, you know, 30%, and computer use has increased by 25%. Things that you can actually look to statistics and say, I have the factual evidence to back that up, is very good material to be included in your publicly funded campaign material. It may be as simple as sending out a notice to voters that there's a millage election on this date, and here is the ballot language. This is the type of thing that you may want to send out. But again, you have to be very careful. We recommend typically you seek attorney review of your millage materials, and this would be true, in my opinion, even if you hire professionals to do your marketing campaign, because sometimes the promotional people have a little bit of a different idea than the legal people on your millage material. So that's something that I always recommend. Again, you don't want to spend the money preparing and sending out millage material that's that's problematic, especially I think these days where there's a lot of anti-tax sentiment in the community, and there's a lot of anti-tax sentiment in Michigan, and there's a lot of people that have the time and energy to go through your materials. And I have personally witnessed, kind of heartbreaking library millage campaigns that really have nothing to do with the library or the appropriateness of the millage, but have a lot to do with, everything else. And what we don't want to do in those types of millage campaigns is, one, we don't want to have the headline in the local paper, library investigated for campaign finance, allegations. Or the other kind of that goes in line with that is library, investigated for Open Meetings Act or Freedom of Information Act violations. Those are the types of things that the public perceives as, you're trying to get away with something. Campaign finance laws become very important, that you're trying to do something you're not supposed to be doing, and you're not using public money appropriately. It all feeds into a negative perception. And so that's why, in my opinion, although, I feel that we may be very conservative on that, I think it's important to keep that in mind, especially if you're running what you think might be a tight millage campaign, or a campaign that may have people who are voting or campaigning against you. And in that vein, we recommend that you treat those who are campaigning for the millage the same as those who are campaigning against the millage. If you charge 5 cents per copy for your public copier, don't let the vote yes people come in and use the copier and charge the vote no people. This is very, very true and very important when it comes to your meeting room policies. Be very careful if you allow the ballot question committee or the people that are organizing a response in favor of your millage campaign. If you charge a fee for use of the room, charge them a fee. If you have a 2-hour minimum on the room reservation, make them stick to that 2-hour minimum. And then give the vote no people, if there are any, if there's any, vote no people, let them have the same, let them ever have the same, chance to use that meeting room, or the chance to use your public copier at the same rate. Patron list, I think it might go without saying, but use your patron list. Don't give those patron lists to any person or party to conduct a millage campaign that's outside the library, okay? Do not give those to the friends of the library, because that distribution would violate the Library Privacy Act. Okay, I'm going to give you my opinion on something that may differ from your attorney's opinion, so I think this is something you should run by them before you do it. But my opinion is that using your patron list to distribute material that is publicly funded, that doesn't violate the Michigan Campaign Finance Act, for example, your neutral, objective material, that's not being used by other parties, that's being used by the library, and I think sending those out to your patrons would not violate the Michigan Library Privacy Act. But again, that's my opinion. I encourage you to seek your attorney's opinion on that issue before you do anything. Again, it's one of those things, especially during these times, you have to be very careful so that people will use anything against you to try to bring down your campaign. If you happen to live in that environment, you have to be very careful. One of the questions I had is that the library's had a brand that they've used for over 10 years, and it's the statement printed "Libraries Yes" on all their literature and their delivery materials. This is not nor ever used for a millage campaign. What do we do now? As long as it's not I think I'd have, that's an interesting question. I've never had that before. I'd encourage you to contact me offline, but as long as it's not used in connection with the millage campaign, for example, if that's your stationery that you send out your material on your, your public funds, certainly that's something I would not use. I would change that. But whether you have to change your face of your library, that's something that on your delivery vehicle, I doubt that would be the case. But again, I'd be happy to talk to you about more detail. But again, it's something to keep in mind is that, and the reason I raise that in context with this is that the timeline for the Michigan Campaign Finance Act does not necessarily track the timeline for your millage resolution. So if your millage resolution is due on August 24th, let's say for the November ballot, that doesn't mean that on August 24th you therefore have to start complying with the Michigan Campaign Finance Act. Your requirement to comply may start before that. If you've done, pre-camp, you might know now that you're going to have a campaign in November. You certainly can't start doing things that are vote yes now, even though you haven't officially approved your ballot language. So keep that in mind, is that there's not a specific timeline, but I don't think that it would be viewed as a violation if you're, I don't think they're going to require you to scrub your pickup truck from that, but or your delivery truck, but. Again, if you have questions, I encourage you to speak to your specific attorney about that, because they may be able to review the issue for you and give you some comfort with respect to that. It said, another question, can the millage campaign use the mailing list that is used for library and endowment newsletters? If that list is used for library and endowment newsletters is a list that is held and created by the library, it would be the same as your patron list, because the Michigan Library Privacy Act applies to quote-unquote library records, and those are records created and used by the library that contain information about patrons. I would consider that even if you had a library newsletter list that's different maybe from your patron database list, so that would still be a library record. So giving that list out to a ballot question committee would be in violation of the Michigan Library Privacy Act. If I'm misunderstanding the facts on that question, please certainly let me know. We can talk about it on the question and answer session. One thing to do to market the millage material is to consider having citizens, a grassroots movement, form a ballot question committee. And a ballot question committee has to be formed if the group desires to spend over $500 promoting the campaign, or promoting the campaign or a ballot question. You can't have 50 people each contribute $100 to avoid this. I mean, it's really viewed as a collective effort. It's a pretty simple paperwork to form a ballot question committee. In the Michigan Bureau of Elections website has actually very good material on this, and what you really need is a good treasurer, because the treasurer is the one that has to fill out most of the paperwork and keep track of the donations and so forth. So if you have a good treasurer, I've seen a lot of retired bank employees, for example, that become very valuable on these types of committees. The committee must be independent from the library, and what I mean by that is our recommendation is that you not have the board president or the director serve or form the on the ballot question committee or form the ballot question committee. Those people, library employees can certainly volunteer their own time independently to work for those ballot question committee. But one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're talking about expending public funds in promotion of an election is that public funds aren't just general fund distributions or money that that's given over from your general fund. It's employee time. It's stationery. It's the copiers. It's the toner. It's the fax machine. All that is considered part of the public funding of the ballot question that can't be, that must be used in compliance with the Michigan Campaign Finance Act. So if you've got a library director that's, the president of the ballot question committee, there's going to be a lot of questions as to how that director, if she's at work, is she, answering, what if she answers a question for the ballot question committee? While the employees are quote-unquote on the clock for the library, that's considered public funding, and that's so those people should avoid another reason why we recommend when we were asked a lot of times about how much literature can be displayed in the library. Well, if you have your promotional material by the ballot question committee, certainly that can't be displayed in the library because that's using library space, et cetera, for the portion of the campaign. If you use your publicly funded neutral objective material, that's okay to post. The problem is that if some patron comes in and asks one of your staff members about it, then your staff member is arguably spending his or her public time, paycheck money, answering questions. Could some of those questions be neutral? Yes, but could some of them show maybe, a bias or some maybe unintended, responses that, promote the millage? Possibly. Again, these are probably small technical violations, but, things to consider and better safe to avoid. The ballot question committees can tell voters to vote yes. They can, say if you don't vote yes, the library is going to have to, shut their hours and, terminate staff and so forth. So certainly the ballot question committees, although they, depending on the community, maybe get hard to get volunteers to do that. Certainly those committees can be far more effective. The lawn signs, for example, if you've got lawn signs that say, support the library, vote yes for the library, those are something that's going to really maybe resonate with the people more than, here's a copy of our ballot language, let me know if you have any neutral questions I can answer. I mean, certainly it's a lot more interesting and the material tends to be a lot more, rah-rah for the library. And so seriously consider, finding people to do that if you think that there may be significant, controversy in your millage, or that it may be a tough sell. And there's libraries I talk to that, pass their millages by 75–80%, every time. There's not a peep from people, and so it may not be the best use of your time or money to have these campaigns. So that's something that, again, you're going to be the best judge of depending on where you are and what issues you may be facing in your particular community. I wanted to know, first of all, if there's any questions. I had a number of questions about Section 10 and 10A and township libraries that I was going to answer. But I thought if anyone had any questions in the meantime about the any of questions about ballot promotion or the ballot language, that we could address first, and then for those that are still interested in hanging on for the Section 10, 10A discussion, we can certainly, leave those people on. Let's see, I had a question about, can a ballot question committee attend a library event outside the library and hand out information? Yes, as long as they're in compliance with your library patron behavior policies. You certainly shouldn't prevent a group. We write patron behavior policies all the time, and one of the toughest questions I get is solicitation outside the library. And petitioning for an election, especially, gathering signatures and handing out material is viewed by the courts as very high on the list of constitutionally protected material, okay? So there's always a question, and it's very library dependent, about where people can petition, where people can hand out material and so forth. And so your library policy should govern, but basically the rule of thumb that I like, if it's part of the public sidewalk or, public way, people should be able to stand outside there and be able to, provide their information, gather signatures, etc. But, make sure that if the ballot question committee is allowed to do that, that if somebody set up a vote no right next to the vote yes people, that they wouldn't be prohibited from doing something, similar to that. So make sure you treat everybody equally and comply with your library policies. Yes, this program will be available online. It sounds like some people weren't able to attend the whole thing. And this was one of the focuses on this also was we were trying to get a series of topics that may also interest library trustees. Library trustees may have day jobs that they can't attend this live, and so we will send out an email to all the participants to how to get the program again archived, and that's something we'll be doing hopefully today, but certainly as soon as possible. So yes, you'll be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint and a copy of the presentation, so you can either view it yourself or send it on to somebody else or have them sign up for it. Another question, is there any issue with the president of the ballot question committee not living in the municipality where the millage question is being asked? I know of no prohibition about that. I don't think that there's anything that requires them. I think actually the courts are very flexible on that. I mean, there's professional people that do some of these millage campaigns. I'm not sure, and I'll get back to you if I find anything that's contrary to that, but I don't believe that there's any prohibition about that. If you're not spending over $500, you don't need to form a ballot question committee. The $500 is where that's triggered, but again, I don't want to confuse issues. But that doesn't mean that you can spend even $1 of library money on the promotional material. And I would caution if you're thinking, if you think you're going to spend $300 on lawn signs, for example, I would take a look at that material that's available on the Library of Michigan's website about ballot question committees and make sure, I think they go into very detailed discussion about when you need to form the ballot question committee, because what I don't recall is whether if they in kind or if it's just true dollar cash value. So I would, from my understanding, is that $500 is the limit, but I certainly would consult with that material to make sure that there's not something that I'm not aware of that would cause you to trigger that ballot question committee issue. Is there any more questions on the ballot language, the authority, or the millage campaign right now? If not, I was going to use the time left to go over some of the Section 10 questions, Section 10A questions. All right. And if there's, I'm going to be watching the question and answer, so if there's something else that comes up on any of the topics, just let me know. And bear with me a second, I'm trying to go through and read these questions and make sure I've got the answer, so if there's a slight pause, okay. One of the questions was, if the library is a city department and a city charter, how can you convert to a Section 10A setup, and how and when is the board elected? Is the board paid or unpaid, and how is the best way to handle administrative services, a contract with the city? Some of these questions are statutory, some of them are sort of the million-dollar question, but the city can convert to a city charter from a city department or a city charter library by following that petition process in Section 10A. So you only need 50 voters to do that, 50 electors in the city to do this. Oftentimes it depends on if the city is it's interesting if the city is assisting you with it or on your side with it. It's very easy to do. The process is handled very easily. The city's on board with it. The problem is if the city is reluctant or is fighting the establishment of the city library, they may actually give you some problems, and there's a couple of ways they can do that. And so if that's your situation, I'd be happy to talk with you offline. The board is elected. At first there's a provisional board that is appointed when what happens is that the petition asks for the millage, and then there's a millage election. And the millage election does two things. One, sets up and establishes the library, and then it provides for the payment mechanism. And then after that board is established, a provisional board is appointed by the city in Section 10A or the township if it's a Section 10 library. And then after that, I think it depends on what type of library you are, but typically it's at the first election, for city, township, or village, the next annual or biennial city, village, or township election, that's when the permanent board is set up. For those cities that have elections every 4 years, if there's any of you out there, that's something you may want to talk to your city attorney about, because it's it's just not handled in the PA 164. We've sort of worked it out in the past, but that's one of those issues that's unfortunately, it's an old statute and it just didn't contemplate a city charter that had elections every 4 years like a township. The board in a township PA 164 library, in my opinion, is unpaid. There's no authority. Again, one of the first things I mentioned here is that when you have a municipality, you look to see what sort of authority you have. And if it's not specifically in the statute, you don't have the authority. If you look at the District Library Establishment Act, they have specific authority to pay themselves. But a township, city, or village PA 164 library does not have that authority. How is the best way to handle administrative services, a contract with the city? There's two ways to do it. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because it's been an issue in a number of communities lately, but right now the way a PA 164 library is set up is that the treasurer, the fund has to be contained in the city treasury. And so that causes all sorts of problems with trying to deal with administrative services because the city will often try to charge for services for maintaining that fund. And whether that's permissible or how much is always a subject sort of issue. And so that's something that certainly I think you need to work through. Other things, you know, for example, the building, if it's a building owned by the city, the new library board may have to lease that building from the city. We typically enter into certain arrangements with the city to deal with all that at the time, whether it's a fiscal agency agreement to deal with the fund issue or a building lease to deal with the building issue. Sometimes we have employee leasing agreements to deal with the employment issues. We try to get everything dealt with. The best way to handle it is by contract. Otherwise, often it's up in the air, and we've had some interesting situations lately. So typically, for those things, and then for those things that are not required to be kept with the city, there's no requirement, there's no legal requirement. For example, if you have a new PA 164 library and you don't want to use the city's building, there's no requirement that you enter into a contract with them for the lease of that building. You have the authority to go get your own building. There's certain issues, finance issues that you have to work through, and you may need the city or township with bonds, for example, so those are things you always have to keep in mind. But usually a contract and working with the city to sort of establish the separation of the library is always a good thing. Does the city library established under PA 164, when levying the first 1 mil, have to levy the first mil, or can they determine the amount less than 1 mil? The city library, I'm assuming you're talking about under Section 1 of the city library, Section 1 of PA 164. The city council has the authority to determine within that first mil how much they levy. And it's also, in my opinion, subject to Headley rollback. So let's just say they have the authority to levy 0.9 mil. There's no legal requirement that they levy that 0.9 mil. They can levy 0, they can levy 0.1, they can levy the 0.9 mil. Whatever they're legally, the limit is, that's what they're tied to, but there's no requirement to go to the limit. Let me see. A question, is a Section 10A library governed by the city charter? No, a Section 10A, once it becomes a Section 10A library, it's governed by Section 10A and other provisions of Section 164. If your library was established under Section 10 and then the township becomes a city, do you then refer to your library as a Section 10A even though the voters formed it as a Section 10? It says right here that if a township, I'm reading right from the statute, so hopefully I'm answering this question. If a township or village has been established pursuant to Section 10 and it's incorporated in the city, then the library board shall continue in office and shall continue in existence and be governed by the provisions of Section 10A as if the Free Public Library had originally been established under Section 10A. So your library, I think essentially you become a Section 10A city library according to statute. Okay. I'm just scrolling through the last few questions. Thank you for your patience. Let's see, if your library is a Section 1 library and you want to increase your 0.1 mil in perpetuity to 0.13 mils, do you have to get City Council approval to put on the ballot, or can you just file a petition? If I'm reading your answer correctly, the city can levy up to 0.1 mil, and then I believe, based on the statute, that the petition process, there's no specific petition process under Section 1. So what the statute says is that that the city council may increase the tax levied by not to exceed 1 mil if approved on the election. So it looks like that the statute has put that under Section 1 in the hands of the city library. But I'll be honest, that's one of the reasons why a lot of Section 1 libraries convert to Section 10A city libraries, is because of the authority to control their, I guess, millage destiny, for lack of a better word. Okay. Oh, you had a very good, there's a very good question here about a friends group having to form a ballot question committee. The answer is the friends group and the ballot question committee are two separate legal entities, okay? Members of the friends group may form a ballot question committee. The thing that you have to really, really be careful about is the issue about how much the friends group are allowed legally to spend on the election campaign before they're considered to be a lobbying group, and maybe in violation of their 501c3 tax status. So the friends group, it's not like the friends group can form a ballot question committee, because it's individual incorporators have to form that ballot question committee. They may be the same people. Okay, there's nothing that prevents people from the friends group from also becoming people who form the ballot question committee. The real trick to this question is whether it's how much that friends group can spend, and that's something that I think I would encourage the friends group to look into, if especially if they're the amount that they're thinking about contributing is going to see 10% of their, I don't have the information in front of me, it's either their proceeds. I wanted to point out the issue to you because that's one of the questions we frequently get, and we have people at our firm here that handle those types of issues, but that 501c3s have to be careful not to lose their own tax-exempt status by giving too much to the ballot question committee and therefore jeopardizing their tax-exempt status. Let's see, our appropriated millage is subject to tax capture. That's a good question. My understanding is that they would be if they haven't been exempted from the tax capture. I don't think there's a difference between voted millages with respect to capture and the tax, the extra voted and the appropriated. But if that answer is incorrect, I'm going to look that up after the seminar, and if that's not, I'll send a message out to the attendees making sure I got the right information on that. That's a very good question, but I'm assuming that the appropriated millages would also be subject to tax capture. That's it for the end of my questions. I wanted to thank everyone for hanging on, and if there's any more questions, certainly shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer those questions. And I also want to promote, we're going to be doing more of these trustees seminars. I've been told that summer reading program time is not the time to be doing these things. So we did this one in before the summer reading program really got into full swing, and then look for us in the fall. My sister's a library director, and I told her that we were postponing it during the summer reading program, and she thought I was crazy for even thinking that we would do something during the summer reading program. So I know it's a very busy time for you, so I appreciate that you were here today, and hopefully for those of you that have trustees that may be interested, they can sign up and view this at their at their convenience, and look for more topics on privacy issues. I think we're going to do some Open Meetings Act, maybe some FOIA stuff. Look for those in the fall in conjunction with the Cooperative Directors Association. And then also, please email me if you have topics. I really like doing seminars. I think the webinars are easy to do, and you can join at your convenience or view at your convenience. So if you have any topics in the future that you're interested in, please let me know. I'm always interested to hear from you. And thanks again for attending. I appreciate it.